Dear friends, welcome to the first in the 9/11 series of Khanversations. Today we are going to talk to two important American Muslim leaders who were active and were in responsible positions at the time of 9/11. We are going to talk to Professor Ingrid Mattson, who is a professor of Islamic Studies at the Huron College in Western Ontario in the city of London. She was the first president of the Islamic Society of North America, the first woman president of the Islamic Society of North America, which is the biggest Muslim organization in North America. She served 2 terms and she has served in various capacities. She is a thought leader and also a guide to the American Muslim community on many critical issues. We will also talk to Salam Al-Marayati, who is the founder president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, perhaps the most important Muslim policy and advocacy think tank / group for the last 30 years in America. Salam Al-Marayati was a very important voice for American Muslims at the time of 9/11 and since. And today we are going to talk to them about what was the impact of September 11 on American Muslims, on America, and on the way Islam is understood by Americans. Were there reforms initiated by American Muslim leaderships, and what direction has the community taken? We will also talk a little bit about the rise of Islamophobia and its impact on American Muslim life. So we are very fortunate to have with us two of the most important voices of the last 3 decades in American Muslim public sphere. So without taking too much time away, let's dive into this conversation with Dr. Ingrid Mattson and Salam Al-Marayati.
Assalamu alaikum, Ingrid and Salam. Welcome to Khanversations. You have both been great friends and mentors for decades. I'm absolutely delighted you're able to join with me, but the moment is quite somber, the 20th anniversary of September 11th. So let me begin by asking you a personal question. Like, how did you personally react when you first heard the news that planes were being flown into buildings?
Yeah, I remember it very clearly because I was on my way into work at Hartford Seminary in Connecticut, and I was going to a planning meeting for a major interfaith program that we were multi-year academic research program that we were planning, and I just flipped the TV on before I went in and heard the news about the first plane and then saw the second plane. And then I went into work and I stood with my colleagues at this, interfaith graduate school, watched the buildings collapse. So it was just, the feeling was a pure visceral feeling of feeling sick, nauseous, horrified. Then, of course, I thought about my kids. So we, living in Connecticut, we're not that far from New York. I used to go into New York City all the time. Million thoughts come into your mind. What about your friends, all your friends living in New York City? How would they be? Many neighbors who would commute. Wondering immediately, because of the speculation about who did it, being very worried for my kids and thinking, what's going to happen? And everyone just ran to go get their kids out of school. Also, would there be another attack? We heard about Pennsylvania. So we were very worried that it, from the perspective of being attacked, possibly with successive attacks, worried about our future, but also wondering what this meant for the Muslim community once we suspected who had done it.
What about you, Salam?
Well, actually, on that day, we had scheduled a meeting with President Bush, and it was the American Muslim Political Coordinating Council that was going to convene that meeting in the White House. So I was with Dr. Maher Hathout, Allah yarhamu, the late Maher Hathout, and we were walking I believe it was on Pennsylvania Avenue. We were walking to the White House when somebody said that the Twin Towers, a plane had crashed into the Twin Towers. And I think the first feeling I had was just disbelief. That I just kept denying that it had anything to do with terrorism. It had anything to do with Muslims. I was thinking that, okay, it was probably an accident. Just like Ingrid, I heard about the first crash, and then we all saw. We went to the National Press Building, and all the monitors were fixated on the Twin Towers, and we saw the second plane hit the tower. So at that point, we obviously the meeting with the White House was canceled. So we went back to our hotel, and it was interesting because on the one hand, all the Muslim organizations who came for that meeting, including the late Aga Saeed, if you remember him, of the American Muslim Alliance, who was the chair or a co-chair for the American Muslim Political Coordinating Council. And we assembled, I don't know where exactly, but we talked about helping with a blood drive. We talked about issuing a statement. We talked about having mosques do whatever they can to protect themselves with law enforcement. So that was the immediate discussion at that time. And then the other issue was how we were going to get out of Washington and back home because all the planes were grounded. We determined at that time that 9/11 was a seminal moment, of course, for the country and for the world, and that life would be very different after 9/11 than it was before 9/11. In fact, the agenda on the meeting was to advocate for a high-level appointment of an American Muslim by the president. So obviously, we had that plan was put in the drawer for the time being, and then went back to the drawing board in terms of how to engage, how to deal with the realities of a post 9/11 world.
Perhaps, I don't know whether you know, whether I shared this with you, but Richard Gephardt, who was one of the Democratic leaders at that time, had reached out to me to write a letter on your behalf. And you were one of those persons who was being considered at that time for a very senior position in the administration. I was about to teach a class when one of the staffers came and told me that planes are flying into buildings. So I saw the second one too with my class, and it was a devastating experience. I came home right away because I wanted to be with my family, and then by 2:00 I actually wrote an op-ed saying America under attack, implications for Muslims everywhere. So that went viral, and it was a devastating effect. How do you think has the aftermath of September 11, the backlash against Muslims, the global war on terror, and also the demonization of Islam and Muslims that then followed, especially on radio and television in the US? What kind of an impact do you think, Ingrid, it had on the American Muslim community?
Well, it was interesting because these things always go through stages. So I remember there was a very compassionate response among our neighbors, faith-based partners immediately. And then I remember when all of that was happening, reading an op-ed by Mark Silk at Trinity College in Hartford saying, okay, this is all very nice, but history shows us that after the initial emotional kind of outpouring of solidarity and support, there will be a backlash. And he wrote that very soon, within the months following. And so I was kind of waiting for that. And I saw, there were so many things that happened, but I'll just give you one example of where I saw things really change. And frankly, I think this had more to do with the subsequent, in the year that followed the invasion of Iraq, and then all of the violence and the American deaths and the sectarian violence that erupted after that. And we could talk more about what, why America went to Iraq in the first place. But within maybe 2 years of that invasion, I saw things change drastically from the, just the average American, because for years I had been going to churches, synagogues, civic organizations, giving these kind of introductory talks on Islam. They would invite you. We don't know anything about Islam and Muslims. We would like to learn something about that. And you would go and you'd give a basic presentation. But within a few years, I would go in, the body language had changed. People were sitting there with their arms crossed, with frowns on their faces. I would give a presentation, and immediately the first question was always, why don't Muslims denounce terrorism? I mean, it didn't matter if the presentation was on Islamic art and architecture or anything. That was the question. And then people kept asking questions saying, well, isn't it true that Muslims believe this and this and this? So what we found is a situation that went from what the Muslim jurists call simple ignorance to complex ignorance. So rather than just not knowing, people now had many ideas about Islam and Muslims, and what they knew or thought they knew, they didn't like at all.
Salam, if you remember, this was also the time after which people started polling Muslims. So there were lots and lots of polls by Pew and others about what do you think about Muslims, and asking Muslims also questions about what do you think about democracy. There was all these questions like, why do they hate us? But if you notice and look at the polls, you find that the negative opinion of Muslims didn't start till 2004 or 5, and so the Islamophobia starts later on. So for somebody like you who was constantly engaged in the political environment, how did the political environment change, and how did it impact Muslims and our organizations?
Well, we definitely took a hit, and probably I'm not even sure if we recovered. As I said, we were ready to be pushing for a major appointment by the White House, and we're still working on that to this day with President Biden. Although we've gotten some nice spots within the administration, some effective people now working in the Biden administration. To be quite frank, the only thing on our minds at that time was survival. How were we as Muslims going to survive? How are we going to prevent rounding up of Muslims, internment camp, broad-based surveillance, spying in the Muslim community? That was the issue. How were we going to present a message to the American public that Muslims are part of the solution, not part of the problem? So these were the issues that we were bouncing around on in every meeting, in every discussion. And I know, hindsight's 2020, and you have all these Monday morning quarterbacks now saying, well, we shouldn't have done this and we shouldn't have done that. I think the reality is, if we had not done what we did which first and foremost, create a partnership with law enforcement, I think a lot of the issues that we're talking about now would have been much worse. There would have been internment. We would have been treated as suspects and not as partners. There would have been more hate crimes. So the partnership with law enforcement was the first thing that we developed, and a counterterrorism program in terms of our message against terrorism. So those were the two things that we felt were important at that time, and I feel like that those two issues helped us get through that very difficult time, and stem whatever it could. It did stem some of these anti-Muslim animus in this country.
I don't know whether you both remember the elections when George W. Bush was endorsed by the American Muslim community, primarily because Al Gore simply refused to interact with us. He just would not talk to American Muslims. And we had three conditions, and Bush at least agreed on two, and Al Gore simply didn't respond. But during that campaign, I spent so much time debating people who said that democracy is haram and Muslim participation in American politics is haram and we should not engage in this politics of this lobbying and giving money. And this is all bribery, so there's corruption in the system. And post 9/11, there was a lot of changes, wasn't it, in the American Muslim community? So Ingrid, could you share with us how within ISNA there was not only this tremendous drive to reach out, not only to the government, but interfaith, but also there was attempts to reform these very things that how we were interpreting Islam itself, wasn't it?
Well, certainly. I mean, we always had diversity of opinions among Muslims and in Islamic thought. And I mean, I never had any questions personally about democracy. But yes, we had to engage with the theological questions, with the ethical questions, and I think the problem is that I would say people, we just have to put politics in its place, right? Like politics isn't religion. Politics is about power and trying to manage power. And unfortunately, everyone, all people fall into very similar psychological, social patterns where they tend to be looking for someone to be their savior, right? That's why Tawheed as a Muslim is so important. Like, we are not looking for a savior on this earth, whether political or spiritual. We have our religion and it's Tawheed, but human beings fall into these patterns, so they keep looking for that person to put all their hopes and dreams in, and so it ends up going to the other side. They idolize some figure, or they put so many hopes in some political figure, and then they're disappointed because politics is not the realm of pure morality. It's the realm of managing various interests, conflicting interests. And for those who seek to engage with politics, like for us, it's about one, being responsible to our neighbors and to the commonwealth that God has given us. And second, trying to prevent a greater harm. And it may mean having to accept a lesser harm or something that's not perfect, but we're doing that to prevent a greater harm. So it's really the area of ijtihad and shura and mistakes and learning from mistakes. And I think that's the problem, is that for many Muslims, even their idea of what the political history of Islamic civilization was completely flawed and utopian and wrong. So, they had this idea of this perfect past. Well, the past was never perfect. Politically, was never perfect. We have maybe perfect ideals, but we've never been able to perfectly achieve them. So there is a lot of education. I think more people get it, although sometimes it seems now we've gone back to some kind of litmus test approach to politics. I don't know. That's a little bit problematic from the progressive side.
It's true. Salam, if you remember, one of the things that you and I often talked, even before 9/11 and a lot after that, was that we need a seat at the table. That we are not just citizens, we are also voters. We want to be part of the policy-making community. We want to be involved in defining what is American national interest. And that has been the reason why both of us, to a great extent, have engaged with think tanks and conversations. But for a while after September 11, the relationship between the Muslim community and the government, regardless of which party was in power, had become very adversarial, don't you think? Do you think that has changed, or are we still, especially now in the light of what's happening in Afghanistan, we seem to see the same adversarial things, like as if it's American Muslims versus American government? There seems to be some kind of a tension. Do you think, talk a little bit about how it was then and how it is now?
Well, I mean, my belief is that, Iraq was of a form of wicked opportunism by political groups in Washington, whether we call them neocons or the Hawks or right-wing groups. Of course, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, but they decided at that time that it was the opportunity to attack Iraq, to destroy its infrastructure, and they wanted it to be destabilized. Whether you're talking about Elliot Abrams, who at that time was the National Security Advisor, he didn't need a confirmation. Elliot Abrams, if you recall, maybe you're too young, Muqtadar, but I recall that he was involved in Iran-Contra, and he was indicted and censored by the Congress, yet he came back and became the architect of Middle East policy for the White House. And Richard Pearl and all the other neocons, Rumsfeld, like George Bush, was the figurehead for them. But they felt that was the time to attack Iraq. And like Afghanistan, it really had nothing to do with democracy or values. It was pure geopolitical interests, whether you're talking about keeping Saudi Arabia as the number one oil producing country and not allowing Iraq to take more of a share than what the United States considered it allowable, or the geopolitical interests of Israel and making sure it can continue to have that military advantage. Those geopolitics took a front seat in the name of counterterrorism, in the name of 9/11.
You're being very kind. I mean, I think that the war on Iraq was a war crime, and it was a crime against humanity. We completely destroyed a country and the lives of literally hundreds of thousands of people, and the people who are responsible for it have not been held accountable. They are selling paintings, for God's sake. What was interesting to me is I always quote Jon Stewart on the war on Iraq, and Jon Stewart said, "We are next going to attack Canada because Canada is exactly like Iraq. It does not have nuclear weapons, and it has nothing to do with 9/11. So yes, I agree. And I think that from that moment, the Iraq war, I think the relationship between the Muslim community and America kind of became very adversarial.
During the ramp up to the war, it was adversarial. And I remember they tried to make up for it by having an iftar. And I wrote an article that iftars are not a replacement for engagement. And somebody from the White House gave me a call and, talked my ear off about how dare we, challenge the administration at that time, and who do we think we are? And I said, we're American citizens and we have the right to say whatever the heck we want. So it was very adversarial, and there are many, many stories that people are unaware of in terms of the back and forth with the administration. However, I think, as I said before, our main objective is just to get through that period and survive, and hope that we can build at least a better opportunity for a future. I just wanted to not correct, but add one thing to this whole issue of the appointment, the endorsement of George Bush over Al Gore. Not only did Al Gore not respond to us and meet with him, and George Bush did, but George Bush actually at that time came out against the use of secret evidence. It was a political promise that he didn't fulfill, obviously, but he did say that during a presidential debate, and that was one of the issues that we had raised, is to speak out against the use of secret evidence. That law on secret evidence was there before the Patriot Act. It was part of the 1995 or 96 Omnibus Counterterrorism Act, Anti-Terrorism Act. So we were dealing with counterterrorism even before 9/11. And unfortunately, it became a worse situation for us. And I'm not sure if we've even have met the demands of dealing with its repercussions to this day. And that leads me to the other point, is that there has been an industry built in fighting Islamic militancy by the United States. And the perception is that the United States is at war against Islam. And as much as American officials disavow that and say that that's just Al-Qaeda and ISIS propaganda, well, there are many people in the United States government that have that mentality, have that ideology. And hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars are dedicated to fighting that fight. And until we deal with that issue from a policy perspective, and what I mean is, why are we battling this group of militants and not Jewish militants and Christian militants and Hindu militants and other militants, Buddhist militants that are wreaking havoc throughout the world? Why are we singling out Islam? That I think is the policy question that still has never been addressed.
Well, part of the answer would be that 9/11 was a direct attack on the US, and we don't see the Hindus or the Buddhists attacking the US in such a fashion, isn't it?
Well, what about white supremacists?
Yeah, white supremacists. Yeah. But this happened this was in place even before 9/11 is my point. So we yes, definitely 9/11 sealed the deal. Let's put it that way. And we had nothing to argue after 9/11 happened. But even before that, and some people wrote that this is blowback to the policies that the United States government had installed, I would say, since the 60s and the 70s. It wasn't in 1990s and in 2001 where these policies were instituted. They were added on, of course, and they buttressed the programs with more counterterrorism, more intelligence gathering, more military activity. But this actually was taking place even before 9/11.
I'm going to ask you this question, Ingrid, and I'm sure you probably don't like to answer this question, but the fact that you were the first woman president of the Islamic Society of North America, was this kind of changes? A lot of changes did take place in the community, with a lot of leadership being passed to younger people who were born in the U.S., as well as those who otherwise were marginalized while immigrant uncles ran the community before 9/11. So do you think that September 11 and the pressure that we were feeling also kind of brought about reforms and openings for alternate voices in the community?
Well, in some ways, I mean, for me, I had been elected vice president of ISNA in the summer, so in August of 2001. So I took my oath of office exactly 1 week before September 11th, 2001. I remember it was where the U.S. Postmaster General was unveiling the first Eid stamp. I remember sitting there and there's a big banner unfolding. And that was, so my idea at that time of what I would be doing as ISNA vice president was, continuing this kind of like integration with integrity in the United States. And a week later, obviously, everything changed. And then I served 2 terms as vice president. I was elected, and then I was elected president in 2005. So for me, this had been something that had been happening in any case. But I do think, one thing that I saw very clearly in the decade from like 2001, say to 2011, is that our community was so stressed, was so under attack, that we needed all hands on deck. It's like in a war situation where whatever concerns people might have about where people belong, it's just kind of like was blown away. And it was like, we need everyone. And definitely we saw, we saw women certainly claiming their space in larger numbers than ever before. Muslim women lawyers and activists and people who would just, moms, stay-at-home moms who learned how to do PowerPoint and signed up with Islamic Networks Group to learn how to do a presentation on Islam to their school or the local civic organization or church or something like that. So it did, we were in the crucible of post 9/11. And in that pressure situation, many people found their voice, they found their strength, they found their place to serve and to. And I heard so many people, ordinary Muslims, say, this expression, "who speaks for Islam," came very popular after that. So many ordinary Muslims saw, on TV, Al-Qaeda people being broadcast their speeches, and they just did not want anyone to think that those people spoke for them. And so this idea of speaking for ourselves became very prominent. And it really was, a beautiful opportunity in that sense. And I believe that we went through that time. And I want to say, we really have to acknowledge that some people were destroyed by it. Not everyone could handle all of that. And some people, the kind of pressure they were put in, their assets stripped, they were incarcerated, deported unfairly, so many things. Some people did not make it. And we need to keep remembering that. But for those who were able, by the grace of God, to survive, I believe it made our community much stronger and more resilient, so that, for example, when Trump was elected and the Muslim ban came in, what did we see? We had allies like never before. We had, lawyers and activists and even Muslim federal politicians, as well as in other seats, who were able to come together and better protect our community in a way that we were just scrambling to do so right after 9/11.
In many ways, I think American Muslims were more successful than the US government in winning hearts and minds.
Oh, that's a very good point, and well said, Salam. And I think are still doing better. I mean, the way the country is divided, one side is unable to communicate with the other side. We have noticed that the American Muslim community's influence, in fact, going back to the rise of Bernie Sanders, the role that American Muslims have played in politics has become tremendously impactful, shall we say. And you find not only that now we have so many people in the Congress, but Muslims are running at every level. Running for governor, running for all kinds of positions, and are winning at the legislative level. We have at the first state level, attorney general, and so on and so forth. So there is a tremendous support. People are voting for people who are wearing hijab. Ilhan Omar's campaign shows that not only her political views, but also her religious views, no matter how they are criticized, she still continues to win elections. So there has been a change in America, no doubt, right? There are those who are strongly Islamophobic, but then there are those who have transcended that fear of Muslims and Islamophobia and are supporting Muslims in their campaign, have become allies. What do you think was the critical turning point that really made this huge difference? It seems that we came out of the shadow of 9/11.
Yeah, I think the turning point was 9/11. It was a wake-up call, and American Muslims, many of them responded. Some did not, and for those who did not respond to the call, I think that they have dissipated. They're not part of the scene anymore. And so from the outset, as Ingrid correctly and aptly said, all hands on deck. Everyone had to go and explain what Islam and Muslims mean to us, why we need to control our own narrative, why we need to speak for ourselves. And we had to learn, unfortunately, about political movements abroad. And you're an expert at it, Mukhtar. So thank God we had people like you explaining the drivers behind many of these Islamic political movements. So we had that challenge, and many of us decided to get out there and speak. Many of us decided to join law enforcement or the military. Many of us decided to run for political office. Many of us decided to join the ACLU. And others decided to join the campaign of Bernie Sanders. All of those were responses, and none of them was wrong. As much as we decry the policies and the politics and the culture of xenophobia which exist in this country, definitely, there still is that opportunity, and that there's that ability to create alliances and coalitions with like-minded people to have a voice. So that idea, as the Quran says, good and evil are not equal. So repel evil with that which is good, and the one with whom there's enmity will become as if he is your warmest and closest friend. And that's right out of the Quran.
So my question to you, Salam, is what do you think is the role and vision for American Muslims going forward? We are now, I think, playing a very important role in American political and American culture. I think that we have come out of the shadow of 9/11, and so we are taking our rightful place in society. So what is the moral purpose of American Muslims?
Well, I mean, that obviously is a question that cannot be answered in a short interview. It deserves a whole conference. Maybe you can get us a grant for that, and we can do a conference. Ingrid and I will be happy to join you with that. But in short, I believe that we are on the verge of creating an American Islamic voice that is authentically Islam, but culturally and within the context of American culture. There's a lot that we are confusing still to this day, but I do believe that we're on the verge of an American Islamic collective voice and collective thinking, a thinking that we can say is distinctively American and authentically Islam. And I think it's needed, not only for jurisprudence, but it's needed for our kids, our future generation, to see that Islam plays a relevant and vibrant role in their lives.
Ingrid, I want to give a slight little twist to this same question about the moral purpose of American Muslims. If you remember, before 9/11, there was this recognition of the American Muslim exceptionalism, that we are in America, we are a highly educated community, we have intellectual freedoms, we have an opportunity and the resources to not only understand Islam without pressures, but also to manifest it. We have those freedoms, so it is our job to show to the rest of the world what is true Islam. You know, there was at least people like me who were talking about this from a chauvinistic perspective, that we have those opportunities to demonstrate. So while some of that can be, shall we say, moderated, that American exceptionalism can be declined a little bit, but still we do have a lot of freedoms and a lot of opportunities and a lot of resources, and also the cosmopolitan nature of the American Muslim community. We have Muslims from every part of the world. Given all these advantages that we have, what do you think is the moral or Islamic purpose of the American Muslim community, North American Muslim community?
I'm going to give a theological answer to this question, which is that we know that this life, this dunya, is a test for us to be able to appreciate the capacities and all the goods that God has given us, and to use them in a way that is within the law, and also that fulfills our mission of uplifting humanity. So I think, all of this opportunity that American Muslims have, we need to take a very sober reflection on the fact that so much of it is based on extracting wealth from other people in an unjust way. And that means domestic workers, whether those are people in our home or the people who are, I'm always shocked. I've moved back to Canada, and I'm always shocked when I hear what the minimum wage is for labor in the United States. It's completely unjust. When we look at the extraction of resources from other countries, when we look at who is contributing most to climate change, the whole world is suffering, and the United States is contributing far beyond its population to climate change. So rather than simply celebrating what we have, we need to really dig into the material causes of this and sift through it. Take what is good. Take what is good about America: a constitution, a Bill of Rights, the rule of law. But let's work on the fact that we're living in many cases on stolen land. And so we're so worried about whether our food, our meat is halal. Well, what about the land that we live on? All of the broken covenants and treaties with Indigenous people in America. When we know that as a Muslim, we should preserve water when we make wudu. Well, how much waste are we generating just in our normal everyday consumption, travel, all of these things? So I believe our mission is to be able to figure out a lifestyle that uplifts the dignity of all people, that is generous, that is not just about charity, but about justice at the economic level and at the, every level of social structures, social, economic, political structures in our society and beyond. Because we are not going to get out of the situation that the world is facing now, especially with wars and the largest number of people who are being disrupted because of political or climate disasters are Muslims. And we are responsible to some extent for that. I am responsible. My lifestyle is responsible to some extent for that. I believe that as Muslims, we can find a balance. It's going to be difficult, but find a balance between, we're not supposed to be monks, so we're not supposed to withdraw and not have anything. We're supposed to live in this world, but how can we live in this world in a way that is dignified and fulfills our interests for growth, but without this unjust enrichment that is constant, and it really is a problem. America is really very much an engine of much injustice simply by the economic system that is built here.
So basically, American Muslims should become a voice and a force for good, not just in the political arena, but also in terms of our lifestyle and culture, and advocate for justice, environmental justice, social justice, and also try and do no harm. I think this is one of the
do no harm. Exactly.
Do no harm is. I don't know whether I've ever had this opportunity. I've known you both for decades, and I've worked with you. Sometimes we have even had public spats. So I do want to tell you that you both have been like wonderful inspirations for me. And I am happy to say that I would like to thank both of you for the service that you have done to our community. And I don't want to thank you too much, because I would like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward you for all the service that you have done for us. But I do want to tell you that just having leaders like you in the community is one of the gifts that American Muslims give to America, to the rest of the world. So even if I have never said it in the past, I want you to know that I have admired you all for a long time, and I'm absolutely grateful for your service. And also, thank you for talking to me. Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Muqtadir. Assalamu alaikum.